Welcome to the DrRcraft CSS color types tutorial. CSS colors can be defined in multiple different ways. In previous videos, we've already covered some of them, such as hex, RGB, and name colors. However, there are a few more ways to define color, where some properties are easier to adjust than others, and are more intuitive than hex and RGB colors. First, let's briefly review the basic color types that we've learned previously. Before we start, let's add an element to the HTML which can display the color. Or for example, we can add a div element and then go to the CSS and style the div element. First of all, we need to give it a size. So width 100 pixels, and we can make it the same height of 100 pixels, and then we can set the background color. So first I'm going to set it to a named color like purple. Now as you can see, this is a purple div element. So in this example, we're using a named color, purple. However, there are also over 100 other named colors that we can use. For example, green, or even very specific ones like coral or goldenrod. These are all different colors. The benefits of using named colors is that there's a lot to choose from and it's easy to write and remember. However, the downside is that you can't create your own named colors, and there are only a limited amount to choose from, like a little bit over 100. To make more precise colors, we can use hex colors, denoted by a hash character and then hexadecimal numbers. There can be 3 of them, like this, 4 of them if you want to make it transparent or translucent, 6 of them if you want to increase the precision of the color, and 8 of them to add transparency. The benefits of using hex colors are that they're usually very short, shorter than some named colors, and they're very precise and you can customize them however you want, and you can also make them as transparent or opaque as you want. However, the downside are that it's very hard to come up with background colors with hex unless you use a color picker. For example, you can't predict what this color will look like, and it uses hexadecimal numbers which aren't very intuitive to use. So if we don't want to use hexadecimal colors, then we can use RGB instead. And it takes a minimum of 3 parameters, and we can set them to any number from 0 to 255. Like for example, we can set this to 136 and 67, and it creates a unique color. On top of this, if we want to add transparency, we can make RGBA instead, and then we can set how transparent it is, 1 being completely opaque and 0 being not visible at all. The benefits of RGB and RGBA color is that you can specify opacity and transparency, and you can very precisely specify the color you want to show, and it uses base 10 decimal numbers, which may be more intuitive. However, the downsides are that it's usually very long, longer than most named colors, and it's very hard to predict what the color will look like when you run the code. Like, it's very hard to tell what this color will look like. And for RGB colors, the first parameter represents how red the color is. The second represents how green the color is, and how blue the color is for the last parameter. And for background colors, for hex, these can be separated into 2 characters each if there's 6 or 8 characters in this entire section, or 1 if it's just 3 or 4 characters. And then similar with RGB, these first 2 or first 1 represent how red the color is. The second represent how green the color is, and third represents how blue the color is. Now let's look at some more modern color types that we can use. The first one is known as HSL, and it stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. The hue can be set as an integer from 0 to 360, or it can be an angle measure like 15 degrees, which is the same thing as just omitting the degrees. And then the saturation, which is set as a percentage, and then the lightness, which is set as a percentage as well. And if we run it, you can see it creates a relatively desaturated, reddish, and medium light color. Along with this, we can also use HSLA to set the opacity of the color. For example, 0.8 will make it slightly transparent. The benefits of using HSL color is that it's much easier to tell what the color will look like than if you're using hex or RGB, because we can set the hue of the color, which isn't possible with hex and RGB, and we can also set the transparency. And the downsides of HSL color are that it's relatively large in the code compared to other parts of it. Finally, we have a similar type of color named HWB. Now, unlike the other colors, which are functions, this one does not have comma separated parameters. Instead, they're separated by spaces. And so we can set the hue to whatever it was before. So, for example, 15, and then a space, and then define the whiteness, which is what the W stands for here, to 50%, for example, and then blackness to 70%. If we run it, you can see we get a dark gray color. And we can also set the opacity of the color by adding a slash at the end. And then we can set it to a decimal or a percentage, like the whiteness and blackness. I've adjusted the colors here because the higher the whiteness and blackness are, the more the color gets muted. So you can see if I set it to 80%, it's now completely desaturated. So we set it to lower values, and you can see more of the color appears. The benefits of using HWB are that you can set the hue like HSL, and you can set the transparency, but the downsides are that it's relatively big to write, and it's hard to control. For example, the whiteness and blackness, if you set them too high, then the color will be desaturated. This concludes the CSS color types tutorial. Thank you for watching.